I was the pre-selected crown princess, and marrying me would make the prince the crown prince. However, the third prince, who was of marriageable age, fell in love with a palace maid and insisted on marrying her as his main wife. To secure his position as crown prince, I opened a back door and had the palace maid brought into the mansion as his concubine. On that day, red ropes were hung, and the palace maid took her own life in the bridal chamber. Years later, the third prince ascended the throne and slaughtered my entire family in revenge. When I opened my eyes again, the emperor asked me which prince I favored. Under the gaze of the third prince, I knelt and pleaded, "This humble maiden wishes to marry the sixth prince. I humbly request the emperor's permission for the marriage." Chapter 1. I served as crown princess for 6 years but never became empress. Shuangwen granted me the title of concubine and imprisoned me in the cold palace. It had been 2 years since I last saw Shuangwen. On that day, General Chu died in battle, and the entire nation mourned. Only Shuangwen remained, feasting and celebrating. He was drunk, stumbling into the cold palace. "Chu Yue, you've been arrogant for so many years. Have you ever thought about today? That old fool Chu Xiongtian is dead. He's finally dead." I rose from the bed with a cold expression and walked step by step toward him. Shuangwen was startled and pointed at me in disbelief. "Chu Yue, what expression is that on your face? Your father is dead, and you don't even shed a single tear. You're truly heartless." Slap! I slapped him across the face. What expression should I have? Should I be like you? A worthless man who would grieve so deeply over the death of a palace maid that you'd neglect the entire nation? Shuangwen covered his face and glared at me angrily. "You don't understand. A wicked woman like you will never know love. I'm avenging Shuangwen and the woman I loved. What's wrong with that? I'll slaughter your entire family and make you taste the pain of losing your beloved." Shuangwen screamed in revenge, but I could no longer hear him clearly. I walked up to him, and that slap was all the strength I had left. "Since my father died in battle, Shuangwen has cut off my food supply. I've been imprisoned in this palace, starving for 3 whole days. I know Shuangwen is waiting for me to give in, but I, Chu Yue, have never surrendered in my life. The entire Chu family was loyal and heroic, yet they all died because of me. How can I possibly go on living?" Shuangwen didn't notice my unusual behavior. "If you are willing to kneel before Shuangwen's grave and admit your mistake, I will take you out of this cold palace, take you to see the remains of the Chu family, and let you bury them. Bury them. That's right. I can't die now. My grandmother, mother, and elder brother are all waiting for me. I must return." I suddenly grabbed Shuangwen. "I promise you, I will return to the Chu." A blood-red dagger pierced my heart. Blood trickled from the corners of my mouth as I uttered my final word. "Family." I stared at Shuangwen in disbelief. The hairpin I clutched tightly in my hand fell to the ground along with me. Shuangwen stepped on the hairpin with his foot, snorted coldly, and said, "Chu Yue, I knew you were a wicked woman who wanted to harm the emperor. Since you are so heartless, I can only send you to meet the ancestors of the Chu family ahead of time. You'll be on the other side of the Yellow Springs, where you can collect their bodies." I looked at the hairpin under his feet, my eyelids growing heavier and heavier. This hairpin was carved by Shuangwen himself and given to me 10 years ago on the Lantern Festival. But he didn't recognize it. Back then, he said, "Little moon crescent, I'll take care of you for the rest of my life." It wasn't like this back then. In the final moment before my consciousness faded, the hairpin engraved with the crescent moon broke. In the blink of an eye, little moon crescent's coming-of-age ceremony had ended, and it was time for her to be betrothed. Yet the third prince, at this critical moment, intends to marry a palace maid as his official consort. My consciousness slowly returned. And before me were my grandmother and my mother, engaged in conversation. Wait. Mother? I suddenly stood up and threw myself into my mother's arms, weeping bitterly. Mother. Mother. I miss you so much. My mother was startled by my sudden movement, but quickly recovered and patted my back, whispering comfortingly. Grandmother threw her walking stick to the ground. This third prince is truly too much. Our little crescent moon cannot be treated this way. That's right. Ever since I was named crown princess, I have never behaved so improperly. My mother and grandmother naturally assumed that I had been deeply hurt by Xiaoyanin. I realized it too. This must be exactly as the storybooks say. I've been reborn and returned to the past. Back to when I was just 16, having just passed the coming-of-age ceremony, and hadn't yet been betrothed. Though I hadn't been betrothed yet, the entire capital had already tacitly accepted that the future crown prince would be the third prince, Xiaoyanin. And it was also tacitly accepted that I was engaged to Xiaoyanin. The current emperor and my grandfather were as close as brothers. After my grandfather died in battle at the border, my father stayed behind to defend the border without hesitation. Because of this, the emperor did not name a crown prince but instead named me the crown princess. The prince who marries me will become the crown prince. The eldest prince had no interest in the throne and was granted a title and married a proper wife at a young age. The third prince was born in the same year as me, in the 5 years following the third prince's birth. The imperial family only welcomed the fourth prince and the fifth princess. The fourth prince died young, not surviving past his first birthday. The sixth prince, who was 6 years younger than me, was even younger, and the seventh and ninth princes were even younger still. Thus, everyone believed that the one destined to marry me would be the third prince, Xiaoyanin. I too believed this. But no one could have imagined that the day after I came of age, the third prince requested an imperial edict, marrying the palace maid Shuangwen as his official wife. The emperor was furious and ordered him to kneel in front of the palace for a day and night. But Xiaoyanin did not back down and insisted on marrying Shuangwen as his official wife. If everything goes as planned, the palace will soon send someone to invite me to the palace. In my previous life, faced with the emperor's test, I still chose Xiaoyanin. Upon learning this, Xiaoyanin came to me triumphantly. He said he had promised Shuangwen to marry her in a proper ceremony. He hoped I would step aside and become the crown prince's concubine. Though a concubine, her powers would be equal to those of the crown princess. To submit to a palace maid was something I could never agree to. I refused on the spot, treating it as a joke. But Xiaoyanin persisted, urging me to yield. After a prolonged dispute, I grew so angry that I ordered the side gate opened in the name of the crown prince's consort and had Shuangwen brought into the mansion with the rituals of a concubine. What I didn't expect was that Shuangwen felt wronged. A red rope was hung, and he hanged himself in the bridal chamber. Because of this, Xiaoyanin harbored a grudge against me and against the Xiao family. After he ascended the throne, he slaughtered my entire family to vent his hatred. And all of this began on that day. The emperor summoned me to the palace and asked me, Xiaoyuya, among all my sons, which one do you think is the most promising in this life? Just like in the previous one, someone from the palace came to fetch me. After entering the hall and paying respects, the emperor asked me that question. I paused, put down the teacup in my hand, and asked in return, Uncle Emperor, are you asking me to choose from all the princes? The emperor nodded. Among all my unmarried princes, Little Moon Crescent may choose anyone. I pretended to be shy, covering my face. Moon Crescent hasn't seen the princes in a long time. Perhaps I should meet them first. My uncle laughed heartily. That is indeed the proper course of action. I was indeed too hasty in my decision. Immediately, the eunuch by the emperor's side took his leave and went to summon the princes. The 6th, 7th, and 9th princes arrived together. as they had just finished their studies at the Imperial Academy when they were summoned. The third prince arrived last, in a hurry, and had not changed his clothes. He was still wearing a simple blue robe. Perhaps he had gone out of the palace with shuangwen. The four princes stood in a row, waiting to be chosen. I hesitated to speak, and the emperor did not urge me, instead sipping his tea leisurely. Just as everyone was growing impatient, I rose to my feet and walked up to the ninth prince. The ninth prince was 5 years old, unlike his older brothers, with a round, plump face and tender, fair skin. I took 2 more steps forward and stood before the seventh prince. The seventh prince was 8 years old, and perhaps because he was tall for his age, he was thin like a bamboo pole. I didn't stop, taking 3 more steps forward to stand between the third prince and the sixth prince. The sixth prince, Shaolin, was 10 years old. The youthful contours of his face had not yet fully faded, and his eyebrows and eyes still held a touch of innocence. In my previous life, Shaolin volunteered to join the army just 1 month after I married Xiaoyanin. Later, he was sent to the frontier, and my father often praised him in the letters he sent back. After reading the family letters, my grandmother only sighed with regret. "What a pity," she said. "He was born too late. If not for that, he would have been the most suitable son-in-law for the Chu family." Lost in thought, I stood there for a long time without realizing it. Xiaoyanin couldn't help but speak up. "Chu Yue, is this decision really that difficult?" I gathered my scattered thoughts, took a half step back, and stood firmly before the sixth prince Shaolin. Shaolin's face flushed red, even his ears turning crimson. "Chu's sister," I murmured softly, then turned to face the emperor. This servant believes that although the sixth prince is still young, he is steady and studious, and possesses the bearing of a crown prince. Amidst the bewildered expressions of the other princes, I knelt down without flinching and bowed my head to request the emperor's decree. This humble maiden is willing to marry the sixth prince. I earnestly request the emperor's permission for the marriage. Xiaoyanin was stunned. "Chu Yue, have you lost your mind?" He pointed at Shaolin in disbelief. "He's only 10 years old. He's just a child," I replied coldly. "What does being 10 years old matter? It's only 6 years. I can wait." The third prince is of marriageable age, and I hear his bride has already been chosen. I wonder which auspicious day they've selected. I'll be sure to drop by and ask for a cup of wedding wine. As soon as I finished speaking, the emperor, who had been sipping tea, could no longer sit still. He cleared his throat twice and said, "Xiaoya, perhaps you've heard some rumors and misunderstood your brother Yenin. Without your approval, he wouldn't dare to marry a concubine. I still remember how much you used to cling to the third prince when you were little. Every time you came to the palace, you followed him everywhere. Once, when Yenin wasn't there, you clung to my legs and kept asking, 'Where is Yenin, brother?'" At this point, the emperor paused and sighed lightly. "In the blink of an eye, you and Yenin have grown so much. I'm getting old. It's time to crown the crown prince." I didn't respond to the emperor's words immediately. When I was young, I did indeed cling to Xiaoyanin, but it wasn't because I liked him. The first time I clung to Xiaoyanin and entered the palace was to escape my father and mother. My father was dedicated to teaching me martial arts, but my mother said that martial arts would harm my hands and insisted I learn needlework. In truth, I didn't want to learn either, so I would escape to the palace after school to hide. I could also sneak some pastries back home and secretly share them with my older brother, who worked hard practicing martial arts. Xiaoyanin thought I loved them, so every time I went to the palace, he had the imperial kitchen prepare them in advance for me to take home. He was worried I would eat too much and get indigestion, so he specifically ordered them to be prepared in small portions. But for my older brother, That wasn't even enough to fill his teeth. My older brother had no choice but to nag me every day to go to the palace. When did things start to change? It was probably when a palace maid named Shuangwen appeared by his side. Shuangwen could make all sorts of pastries I had never seen before. With innovative, unconventional, and playful ideas. Among all the palace maids, she was the most unique. Perhaps it was these differences that attracted Shuangwen. He grew increasingly curious about Shuangwen, and after some back and forth, the two quickly developed feelings for each other. It was also around this time that Shuangwen firmly stated that she would never become a concubine. She would only accept the phoenix robe, a palanquin carried by 8 men, and a proper marriage. Otherwise, she would rather remain unmarried and live out her life alone. Shuangwen did not want to give up Shuangwen, so he came to persuade me to step aside. Thus, the enmity of our past lives began. In this life, I have come to realize that I must never force myself to marry Shuangwen. The Chu family must be protected. My thoughts returned, and I knelt down to apologize. This servant has always regarded the third prince as an older brother. But I never imagined that it would lead to such a misunderstanding between the emperor and the prince. This is all my fault. Please punish me as you see fit. The emperor's eyes darkened. Yue, are you set on choosing the 6th prince? I bowed my head and said, yes. Seeing my resolve, the emperor sighed and said, if that is the case, have the astronomical bureau match the birth charts and choose an auspicious date to draft the edict. Xiaoweya, you still have time to change your mind. Don't let your royal uncle down again. The emperor's attitude clearly showed his dissatisfaction with my choice. My heart sank, but I kept my expression neutral and bowed in gratitude. The emperor turned his head to look at Shaolin. As for the 6th prince, since little moon is so highly of you, I will entrust you with full responsibility for the imperial examinations. Let me see for myself the bearing of a crown prince. Shaolin stepped forward and bowed. Your Majesty, I will not disappoint you. The emperor held his head and waved his hand. Enough. I am tired. You may all withdraw. Everyone bowed and withdrew. Outside the hall, Shuangwen scolded me angrily. Yue, you usually just cause a little trouble, but this time you caused such a commotion and even dragged the 6th prince into it. Don't you fear the ridicule of the entire world? Ridicule? I clenched my teeth at those words, finding them amusing. Ever since Shuangwen announced his intention to marry Shiryu as his wife, countless people had been waiting to see me humiliated. I looked up at Shuangwen and said, Your Highness, I, Chu Yue, will never be a concubine. A concubine is still a concubine. Shuangwen snorted coldly. In 6 years, you'll be old and ugly, and my 6th brother might not even look at you then. Don't end up being someone else's bride, only to have all your efforts go to waste. Seeing this, Shaolin hurried forward and stood in front of me. Third brother, you are mistaken. I am not you. I will always be devoted to Sister Chu. Even if it takes 10 years. Sister Chu will be my only wife. Shuangwen, however, looked down on him and slapped Shaolin's shoulder twice. You speak so nicely, but you just want the crown prince's position. But it's okay. It's normal for a young man to have ambitions. As your elder brother, I'll support you. As for the imperial examinations, the Chu family can't help you. If you need anything, just come find your elder brother. After saying that, he didn't wait for Shaolin's response and left with a wave of his sleeve. After Shuangwen left, Shaolin looked at me with a determined expression. Chu's sister, I will not let you down. I will prove myself to Father Emperor. My gaze passed over him, fixated on the palace walls beyond. You won't be able to handle the imperial examinations. Shaolin paused, about to speak, but I stopped him. I should say, The one above doesn't want you to succeed. So how could you possibly succeed? Shaolin understood my meaning, lowering his head in dejection. He's still just a child. Did I make a mistake using him as a shield? But the next moment, Shaolin raised his head again, his eyes brimming with determination. How can we know without trying? Shaolin, will never give up. Seeing the light in Shaolin's eyes, I smiled and gently patted his head. Go for it then. Shaolin's face flushed red, and he stammered. Chu's sister. I'm your future husband. You can't treat me like a child. Seeing his expression, I decided to tease him. I immediately bowed and said, yes. Husband. Shaolin was startled by my words and stumbled backward, fleeing in panic. Chu's sister. I remember I have something to do. I'll go ahead. I watched his retreating figure and chuckled to myself. Shaolin's resolute nature would make him an excellent soldier. No wonder my father in my previous life praised him so highly. I turned away and looked up at the plaque hanging high above. The emperor has always favored Shaoyin. In my previous life, I had already noticed this, which is why I endured the humiliation and chose Shaoyin. In this life, though I have chosen Shaolin, it is not what the emperor desires. So how could there be a happy ending? In my previous life, Shaoyin had only been on the throne for 2 years before he annihilated the entire Chu family. Now that I think about it, the emperor likely had already harbored ulterior motives toward the Chu family and had been planning to act against them for some time. The Chu family had been loyal and virtuous for generations, but their achievements eventually overshadowed their superiors, causing those in power to grow wary of them. If that is the case, why should the Chu family hesitate to rebel? That position is meant for Shaoyin, why can't I? Chu Yue. Sit there? The imperial examinations were handled well by Shaolin. It was also because of his intervention that many children from humble backgrounds were selected this time. However, Shaoyin couldn't stand seeing Shaolin do well, so he framed him. He accused Shaolin of cheating in court, claiming he had leaked the exam questions to the candidates. The names he read out were all from humble backgrounds. How could they possibly have the money to bribe Shaolin? The emperor didn't even bother to investigate. He simply stripped Shaolin of his position and sentenced him to house arrest. After the court session, the emperor issued an imperial edict. He appointed Shaoyin as crown prince. In addition to the edict, the emperor also sent someone to invite me to the palace. This time, I had already lost all hope and did not refuse. The emperor was satisfied and ordered Shaolin to be released. After returning from the palace, I told everything to my grandmother and mother. My grandmother's face turned ashen. From the beginning, I knew that being the crown princess was no easy task. In 5 years, not a single prince had survived, and the emperor had favored Shaoyin from the start. Allowing Yue to choose was nothing but a sham. It was all to deceive my late father. My mother hurried to cover my grandmother's mouth. Mother, you mustn't say such things. If others hear you, I replied. Let them hear. If the Chu family rebels, so be it. My mother looked at me in shock and hurried to cover my mouth again. Grandmother looked at me with a hint of approval. Well said. You have some of my courage. Your father and your older brother are just like old men, only knowing how to be loyal. Even when bullied, they can only swallow their anger. Our Chu family commands 1,000,000 troops. Who sits on the throne of the crown prince is naturally decided by our Chu family. My mother covered one person's mouth with one hand, nearly frantic with worry. Mother, please say no more. The troops are all stationed at the borders. I reached out and pulled my mother's hand away. Grandmother, you're wrong. My mother immediately patted her chest. Yue is the sensible one. She doesn't cause trouble with her grandmother. I raised my eyes and looked at my grandmother with determination. Our Chu family commands 1,000,000 troops. Why shouldn't we take that high position ourselves? The room fell silent, and my mother was so scared she froze in place. Grandmother broke free from my mother's grip, leaned on her cane, and walked to me. Well said. Grandmother supports you. Do whatever you want. I was about to respond to grandmother when I saw my mother clutching her nose and collapsing. I quickly rushed forward to catch her, then helped her into the room and laid her down. I was about to go fetch a doctor when my mother suddenly woke up and grabbed my hand. UAE. All I've ever wanted for you since you were a child is for you to be safe and happy. How could you? My nose stung, and I called out, Mother. But she stroked my face and sighed. Never mind. Do as you wish. I've held you back for so many years. And you've suffered enough. Since the Xiao family has been unjust, don't blame the Chu family for being unkind. After obtaining permission from everyone in the Chu family, I let go of my inhibitions and acted boldly. But my mother was right. My father was stationed at the border with his troops. If he were to return, the border would surely descend into chaos. At that point, with internal and external threats, even if the Chu family were to ascend the throne, they wouldn't be able to hold on to the kingdom. Just as I was struggling to find a solution, an unexpected visitor arrived at the mansion. Shuangwen. As soon as Shuangwen saw me, she knelt down and begged me. Miss Chu, I know you don't like Yenin. Please give up the position of crown princess consort for me and let me be with Yenin. I paused as I walked past her and sat down on a nearby chair. You are right, I do not like Xiao Yenin. But begging me is useless. You should be begging the current emperor. Besides, you are just a palace maid, you cannot help Xiao Yenin in any way. The emperor will never agree. Shuangwen was on the verge of collapse. Her legs gave way, and she fell to the ground, screaming, Palace maid. Unworthy, always the same excuse. Why can't a palace maid do it? Chu Yue. Dare you say you have no ambition? Your Chu family commands 1,000,000 troops, have you never had other plans? The maidservants nearby turned pale and were about to drag Shiryu away. I waved my hand, signaling them to leave. I stood up, walked over to Shiryu, and knelt down in front of her. Your ambition is commendable, but ambition alone is not enough. You said it yourself, my Chu family has 1,000,000 soldiers. What do you have? Xiao Yanin's love? Shuangwen was speechless, unable to respond. I stood up in disappointment. Forget it. Go back. Being Xiao Yanin's concubine isn't such a disgrace. Shuangwen suddenly clung to my legs. No. I can't be a concubine. I'll die. I don't want to die. I want to live. Being a concubine will lead to death? I suddenly recalled my previous life. After I had Shuangwen brought into the mansion as a concubine, she died in the bridal chamber. Xiao Yanin believed she had committed suicide by hanging herself because she couldn't bear the humiliation. But upon closer reflection, something didn't add up. If Shuangwen was just an ordinary palace maid, why would she consider being a concubine a disgrace? Why did she insist on being married in a proper ceremony as a legitimate wife? And how could a palace maid have such strange and unusual ideas? Could it be that she had been possessed by a spirit? That's it! Since I can reincarnate at the age of maturity, this palace maid might also have been possessed by spirits or demons, as described in the storybooks. I turned around and knelt down before Shuangwen again. You're not Shuangwen. Who are you? Shuangwen's expression grew panicked, and her eyes darted around. This servant does not know what Miss Chu is saying. Her reaction only confirmed my suspicions. However, whether they were spirits or ghosts, why would they die immediately just for becoming a concubine? This was something I still couldn't figure out. But one thing was clear, as long as Shuangwen stood by my side, Xiao Yanin would no longer be a threat. My mind was racing. but my primary goal was to clarify Shuangwen's stance toward me. I can help you become Xiaoyinen's legitimate wife, but not the crown princess. Shuyu was confused by my contradictory words. What did I mean? If she wasn't the crown princess, how could she be the legitimate wife? Could she? She suddenly stopped, her eyes wide. Are you going to support Shaolin like before? To bring Xiaoyinen down? I raised my eyebrows and nodded in agreement. Your goal is the title of legitimate wife, and I can help you with that. But if your goal is to be the crown princess. I frowned, my expression stern. Shuyan shrank her neck, her eyes suddenly losing their luster. After a while, she regained her composure. As long as I become Xiaoyinen's legitimate wife, I can survive. Miss Chu, our interests don't conflict. We can cooperate. I tilted her chin. Then let's start by destroying Xiaoyinen. In the blink of an eye, snow was falling, and the capital had entered winter. The winter hunt had begun. All the young ladies of the capital would accompany the emperor, hoping to catch the eye of a young nobleman and secure a husband. I had never attended before, but this year I had pleaded with my elder brother to take me along. Xiaoyinen had also brought someone with him, Shuyan. After returning from my place, Shuyan had agreed with Xiaoyinen to become his concubine. This time, Shuyan requested to come along. Xiaoyinen brought her with him. When Xiaoyinen saw me, he seemed surprised. Then his expression turned disgusted as if he had remembered something. Chu Yue, what are you doing here? I remained calm and composed as I looked at him. I heard that the reward for first place in this year's winter hunt is a phoenix-headed hairpin. Your Highness, do you know why I came? Before Xiaoyinen could speak, Shuyan gently tugged at his sleeve. She tiptoed and leaned close to Xiaoyinen's ear. Yuan. I also like that phoenix-headed hairpin. Xiaoyinen understood her meaning. Shuyan rarely asked him for anything. He felt guilty toward Yao and agreed while hugging her. He also issued a threat to me, saying, I will participate in this winter hunt, and that phoenix-headed hairpin is mine. I pretended to be angry and quickly stepped forward to pull Yao out of Xiaoyinen's arms. Shuyan, who gave you the nerve to compete with this lady? You're just a concubine, how dare you use that phoenix-headed hairpin? Shuyan screamed in pain as I squeezed her hand, quickly shaking it off and hiding it in her sleeve. Xiaoyinen saw this and quickly shielded Shuyan behind him, coldly scolding. Chu Yue, I warn you not to go too far. I snorted coldly, flung my sleeves, and turned to leave. Many young ladies from prominent families witnessed the scene and began to gossip. They said that even before I was married, I had already lost my husband's heart. This crown princess is nothing but a hollow title. I paid no heed to their words. After all, whether Xiaoyinen could even marry me was still uncertain. Meanwhile, Yao, who had followed Xiaoyinen away, secretly opened the note I had slipped to her. It contained only 2 words. White horse. The winter hunt lasted 3 days, with the final tally of game kept. On the first 2 days, Xiaoyinen's catch was the highest. After all, no subject dared to compete for the game the crown prince had set his sights on. By the 3rd day, Xiaoyinen was certain he had secured first place. Because Shuyan had complimented him, he switched to a white horse and even changed into a flashy but impractical riding outfit. He looked truly heroic and graceful. However, shortly after entering the forest, the horse began pawing the ground and neighing wildly. It no longer obeyed Xiaoyinen's commands, charging recklessly along the mountain path and heading straight for the depths of the mountains. The guards behind Xiaoyinen couldn't catch up in time. News of the prince's peril spread quickly, enraging the emperor, who dispatched 3,000 troops to search the mountains. It wasn't until sunset that they found Xiaoyinen and carried him back. I stood at a distance and took a glance. Most of his injuries were from falls. Fortunately, He hadn't hit his head. What was unexpected was that there were bite marks on Xiaoyanen's legs. Likely from a wild beast. Soon, the imperial physician finished his examination. Relying on my status as the crown prince's consort, I was able to hear the details of Xiaoyanen's injuries. He was not dead, but the injuries on his legs had caused a high fever, leaving him unconscious. Furthermore, his leg injuries had reached the bone, and in the future, the imperial physician dared not speak plainly, but everyone understood the implication. I couldn't suppress the smile on my lips, so I covered my face and pretended to be sad. Xiaoyanen, as you said in your previous life, Yue is a cold-hearted and cruel woman. As soon as I returned to the tent, I saw someone who shouldn't have been there, Shaolin. Shaolin saw me and approached joyfully. Chu's sister. I furrowed my brows. You shouldn't be here. Shaolin and I should avoid each other. That's why I specifically instructed him to find an excuse to stay in the capital when everyone came to participate in the winter hunt. Shaolin hung his head, looking dejected. I just heard that His Royal Highness had an accident, so I was worried about Chu's sister. I didn't say anything, just stared straight at him. What's wrong with Chu's sister? Is there something on my face? I came in a hurry. I interrupted him. You were the one who did it, weren't you? Shaolin's body stiffened, and the rebellious aura around him dissipated. He curled the corners of his mouth into a smile, looking a bit reckless. I just brought my royal brother a gift and paid my respects for his guidance during the imperial examinations. As he spoke, he noticed my serious expression and leaned in closer with a playful smile. Besides, this is also revenge for stealing my wife. Don't you think? Chu's sister? He leaned in close. Still just 10 years old, but having shed his innocent facade, he now exuded a hint of aggression. I uncomfortably pressed my finger against his forehead and turned away from his face. Shaolin, make sure to dispose of the evidence properly. Don't let them find any clues. Hearing this, Shaolin's dejected expression brightened again. Don't worry, Chu's sister. I cleaned everything up. No one will find anything on us. I adjusted my shawl. It's you. There's no us. Shaolin covered his chest and returned to his childish expression. Chu's sister's words are so hurtful. I ignored him and went back on my own. After all, in this ruthless palace, a prince without any cunning wouldn't stand a chance. But so what? Even if Shaolin is useful, I still don't want to support him. I'm tired of being the crown princess. 11 Due to an accident involving the crown prince, the winter hunt was abruptly ended. The emperor investigated for a long time but couldn't find the culprit. We can only wait for Xiaoyanen to wake up. I dressed up and went to the palace, putting on a show for the emperor. I demanded that phoenix-headed hairpin. I also took Shiryu back. Now Xiaoyanen is unconscious and may be permanently disabled. The emperor assumed I was holding a grudge against Shiryu. So to appease me, he didn't bother to consider whether Xiaoyanen would be angry when he woke up. He granted my request outright. I kept Shiryu by my side for 2 reasons. First, I feared she might renege and betray me. And second, with Shiryu in my custody, Xiaoyanen would dare not act rashly. Xiaoyanen has been unconscious for 3 days, and rumors are beginning to circulate among the common folk. They say that the eldest daughter of the Chu clan and the crown prince have incompatible birth charts, and their destinies clash. Upon hearing this, I knew immediately that it was Shaolin's doing. That night, I sent a letter to Shaolin, ordering him to dispel the rumors. The next day, I requested an audience with the emperor and asked to go to the National Security Temple to pray for the crown prince's well-being. The prayer was, of course, a pretense. My true purpose for going to the National Security Temple was to meet the old abbot, who was the former national teacher. My grandmother had once done a favor for the former national preceptor. and I used that favor to obtain his prophecy. Soon after, the old abbot entered the palace and delivered a prophecy. The crown prince is a late bloomer and must not marry before the age of 20. If this is disregarded, the imperial star will fail to rise, and he will meet an early demise. The emperor had no choice but to order the astronomical bureau to recalculate the auspicious date, setting the wedding for 4 years hence. 4 years was more than enough time for the Chu family to gather troops and seize power. Coincidentally, as soon as the wedding date was changed, Xiao awoke. Now, even the emperor, who had his doubts, could not help but believe it. However, I stayed at the National Security Temple for another week before preparing to leave. On the day I was ready to descend the mountain, just as I reached halfway down, I heard a loud explosion from the mountain peak. The Goen temple had collapsed, with half the temple in ruins. I was dazed by the tremor but quickly ordered the servants to rush up the mountain to rescue people. Fortunately, we arrived in time, and several young monks trapped under the roof beams were rescued. The area was quickly cleared. However, this did not seem like a natural disaster. I voiced my doubts, but the old abbot shook his head with a bitter smile. It was my good-for-nothing disciple, who had been talking nonsense every day about practicing alchemy. No matter how I tried to reason with him, he refused to change his ways, so I had no choice but to lock him up. But who would have thought that he escaped this morning to practice alchemy again? The furnace exploded, and if it weren't for Miss Chu arriving in time with her men, it was indeed the alchemy furnace that exploded, and it had such power. Before I could think further, Shi Yao gasped in shock. Explosives! That's explosives! I shot her a sharp glance, and she quickly composed herself and swallowed her words. I turned to the old abbot and explained, "My maid is also acting strangely. Please forgive her. Since that is the case, let me have the doctor who is traveling with me examine the injuries of the masters." The old abbot put his hands together in thanks. I waited until we were alone before allowing Shering to continue. According to Shering, this thing called explosives was extremely powerful. Once made, it could be detonated at will by controlling the heat. If such a powerful weapon were developed and used on the battlefield, it would be like adding wings to a tiger. It could be used to fight 10 or even 100 enemies alone. I immediately made up my mind. I have a farmhouse in the suburbs of the capital. I will station men there to guard it closely. Shi, this matter is entrusted to you. Shi accepted the order. Her face flushed red, and she was beaming with excitement. I was afraid she was still thinking about Xiao, so I patted her on the shoulder and prepared to give her some advice. But before I could speak, Shi said, "I understand Miss Chu's meaning. I don't want to rely on Xiao. It was just a formality before, but now I'm satisfied. I haven't memorized any formulas, but I can still assist the master in his research." After saying this, she rushed off without waiting to see if I understood. She often referred to herself as a slave or called me by my name when she came to my place. After realizing I didn't mind, she never called herself a slave again. Later, I thought about it and concluded that Shi was probably not some supernatural being but someone from another world. Perhaps, as she had shown, she came from another time and place where everyone was equal. Xiao had been recovering from his injuries, and it had been a month since I last saw him. He came to the Chu family and demanded Shi back. He threatened that if I had done anything to Shi, he would never forgive me and would never spare the Chu family. As he spoke, the scene from my previous life, my father dying on the battlefield and my entire clan perishing because of me, flashed before my eyes once more. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to swallow my anger. Then called Shi back. Xiao saw Shi and tried to take her back, relying on the imperial decree granted by the national preceptor. I summoned the emperor and insisted on keeping her. Furthermore, if Xiao wished to enter the mansion to see Shi, He must first pay 10,000 taels of silver before being allowed to visit. If he refused to pay, anyone could enter the Chu mansion, except for the crown prince. Xiaoyanin had no other choice but to pay. Later, I accidentally heard from Shuangwen about a dish called hot pot. Actually, our dynasty had already had this method of cooking meat in a copper pot. But she mentioned something called hai di lao. She said it emphasized service and could also be used to make money. I used the money Xiaoyanin paid to open such a restaurant. Unexpectedly, it became the largest restaurant in the capital. The funds for recruiting soldiers and horses finally began to take shape. The development of gunpowder in the suburbs of the capital also made some progress. Everything was moving in the right direction. As long as the formula was successful, I would immediately find someone to deliver it to my father by fast horse. But such an important thing. Who would be suitable to deliver it? On the 13th, I sneaked back from the suburbs of the capital, and a figure jumped into the carriage. I looked closely and realized it was Xiaolin. "What are you doing in my carriage?" Ever since I found out he was all white on the outside and black on the inside, Xiaolin hasn't bothered to pretend in front of me. I came to visit the Empress Dowager, catch up, and sneak a kiss. I glared at him and kicked out to try to push him off the carriage. Xiaolin dodged aside and sat down on the side. The carriage fell silent. After a moment, Xiaolin said, "Chu's sister, I plan to request permission from the emperor to join the army." Hearing this, I was startled. In my previous life, Xiaolin also left for the frontier to join the army at this time. Why the sudden change of heart? Xiaolin didn't answer my question directly. There's been a lot of commotion in the suburbs of the capital recently. Others haven't noticed. But I care about Chu's sister. So I discovered the underlying plot. "You." I managed to utter one word before Xiaolin covered my lips, silencing me. "I'm not here to provoke you, I'm here to collaborate. That position holds no interest for me. My father is a moderate ruler, and my elder brother follows his lead. These past years, we've only relied on Uncle Chu to guard the borders, defending but never daring to fight. The Xiao kingdom is growing weaker by the day." I pried Xiaolin's hand away and glared at him angrily. "At such a young age, you dare to lay a hand on me. Don't you dare become a lecher in the future." Xiaolin casually pulled away my handkerchief and wiped the lipstick off his hand. "So, why don't we work together? Whether you sit in that high position and I take care of conquering the kingdom, or I take the high position and the Chu family conquers the kingdom, both are good outcomes, aren't they?" I admit, I was tempted. But there would also be risks. If Xiaolin betrayed us, then I would. Xiaolin noticed my concerns and shrugged. "Don't worry. I'll defend the border for Uncle Chu. I promise that before I come of age, I won't set foot in the capital. The Chu family can do as they please." I raised my eyebrows slightly. "What about after I come of age?" Xiaolin waved the handkerchief in front of me. "After I come of age, I will come to fulfill the marriage vow and marry Miss Chu as my wife." I reached out to grab the handkerchief, but Xiaolin dodged and tucked it into his robe. I didn't get it. I was so angry that I kicked out again. "Who has a marriage vow with you?" Xiaolin jumped off the carriage. "Chu's sister is so heartless." Lin has always remembered that day in the palace, when Chu's sister stood there without hesitation, kneeling and begging the emperor to grant the marriage to the sixth prince. He waved the handkerchief in his hand. "This will serve as our token of love. Little crescent moon, wait for me to come back and marry you." Xiaolin climbed onto the horse led by a guard and rode off into the distance. He seemed to know I was watching him and waved goodbye. I lowered the curtain and looked down, feeling a mix of emotions. But Xiaolin is trustworthy. As for who will marry whom 6 years later, that's hard to say. After Xiaolin volunteered to join the army, Xiaoyanin returned to the imperial court. Though his legs were impaired, There were no princes who could rival him for the throne. He lived comfortably. On the day of the Lantern Festival, I happened to encounter Xiaoyinan in disguise on the street. He pulled out a hairpin from his sleeve and said, "Xiao Yueya. This is the hairpin I carved with my own hands. My crown princess. No one will ever threaten your position." Seeing the familiar hairpin, my heart ached sharply. That was the spot where I had been stabbed with a dagger in my previous life. Perhaps seeing the hairpin had brought back those memories. I accepted the hairpin, using it as a constant reminder. When I returned to the mansion, I saw Shuangwen, who also took out a hairpin. It was almost identical in design, but the engraved words were different. Shuangwen's mood was unusually low. Xiaoyinan had begun to treat me with indifference. I ordered someone to bring 10 golden hairpins and place them before her. "If you want something, you can obtain it on your own." "Xiaoyinan gave them to you?" "I don't care." Shuangwen immediately perked up. "Right. I'll go to the tavern and teach the waiters new dances." Though I couldn't understand her words. Seeing that she was no longer thinking about Xiaoyinan, I felt relieved. For years passed in the blink of an eye. The day of my marriage to Xiaoyinan had arrived. On that day, the entire imperial city was abuzz with the red wedding procession. Xiaoyinan, dressed in wedding attire, wearing a golden crown, rode a red horse, surrounded by numerous guards and palace maids, heading toward the Chu family. I wore my wedding attire, tightly clutching the hairpin Xiaoyinan had given me. The entire palace was adorned with red silk, and the ground was covered in red cloth. I thought, red doesn't stain with blood. The wedding banquet was the perfect opportunity. The time had come, and my palanquin was carried into the eastern palace. Xiaoyinan took my hand and led me into the main hall. The emperor sat on the high throne, applauding loudly. The next moment, the clanging of weapons filled the air. It was the Chu family members who had come to escort the bride. I suddenly lifted the veil and pressed the hairpin in my hand against Xiaoyinan's neck. The emperor reacted instantly, roaring, "So the Chu family is rebelling." I smiled lightly. With this man, what does it matter if we rebel? The emperor was in chaos and hurriedly called for help. But my father had already led his troops into the palace. There was no one left to see the emperor. My elder brother led men to clear the way for me. This rebellion, which had been planned for 4 years, was finally coming to an end. The Chu family had always been deeply loved by the people, and this change of dynasty was proceeding smoothly. The only thing that wasn't going well was that those stubborn old ministers were highly dissatisfied with my ascension to the throne. They supported my elder brother as emperor even more. They were so frightened that my elder brother, who had been watching over the pastries in the imperial kitchen, fled in panic, claiming he wanted to go on an inspection tour of the south. He will not return to the capital for the time being. Before leaving, he took a young kitchen maid with him. The country cannot go a day without a ruler. So the ministers had no choice but to force me to ascend the throne. I became the first female emperor in history. Xiaoyinan had his tendons severed by me and was given to Shuangwen. Shuangwen did not object and carried the unconscious Xiaoyinan to the altar to marry him. But when Xiaoyinan woke up, he started shouting that this was wrong, claiming he was the emperor and demanding to see me. I naturally refused to meet him. I suspected he had reincarnated. Just like me. He had been reborn. He shouted for several days, and Shuangwen couldn't bear it anymore, striking him a few times. "What are you babbling about? Didn't you say you loved me? Isn't this exactly what you wanted?" Xiaoyinan was dazed and disoriented. "No. I should be the crown prince. I am the emperor." Shuangwen was so angry she slapped him twice more. "You're just a lowly slave. Only I saved you. Only I treated you well. I spent tens of thousands of taels of silver to save you. You should love me more and treat me better. All right. I don't know what else you can do. Start by washing my clothes for a few days. Xiaoyinan stared at himself in disbelief. You want me to wash your clothes? Shuangwen kicked him again, and the two glared at each other for a long time. Xiaoyinan clenched his teeth and reluctantly agreed. He limped off with a bucket to do the work. However, that day he ruined several pieces of clothing and was scolded by Shuangwen again. Shuangwen kept her initial promise and kept a close eye on Xiaoyinan. She didn't give him a single chance to redeem himself. Of course, I also sent several people to keep an eye on him. Gradually, after spending more time with Xiaoyinan, Xiaoyinan toned down his arrogant demeanor. Mainly because he couldn't take being teased or beaten. He felt that Xiaoyinan had deceived him. After all, back when they were in the palace, Xiaoyinan had been a pure and kind-hearted flower who understood men's hearts. Xiaoyinan always had all sorts of strange ideas and schemes, which weren't suitable for the imperial court. So I gave her a position as a 7th-rank female official. She went about her business in the civilian sector and actually achieved quite a lot for the people. Later, during her birthday celebration, she got drunk and revealed everything. She was indeed, as I suspected, from another world, brought here by something called a system. That entity had tasked her with becoming the legitimate wife of Xiaoyinan, the chosen one of destiny. That was why all those events had occurred. After completing her mission, the system unlocked some rewards. She used these to develop her inventions. After I ascended the throne, I abolished the harem and implemented a one-husband, one-wife system nationwide. As a result, more and more women began to leave their homes. They no longer relied on their husbands' families and started their own careers. The status of women began to rise step by step. A year later, I had just finished court and was preparing to go back to bed for a nap. I had learned this from Shuangwen. Suddenly, I heard shouts outside. Before I could send someone to investigate, the door was kicked open. A figure clad in red armor with golden patterns, wielding a long spear, stood before me. His build was tall and muscular, and the youthful aura had long faded, replaced by the iron-blooded demeanor honed on the battlefield. It was Shaolin, whom I had not seen in 6 years. He pulled out an embroidered handkerchief from his robe and glanced at me with a smile. Little crescent moon, this general has come to marry you. I curled my lips in a playful smile. The handkerchief had been kept for 6 years and was slightly faded, but the words Moon Maiden in the lower right corner remained as vibrant as they had been 6 years ago. Shaolin leaned his spear against the doorframe. He lifted the hem of his robe, clasped his fists, and knelt down. This servant, Shaolin, voluntarily marries the Chu emperor. I humbly request the emperor's permission for the marriage. I curved my lips. I grant it. 18 a year after the wedding, Shaolin led his troops into battle once more, aiming to unify the realm. This campaign took only 5 years. From then on, the realm was unified, and there were no more wars. Later generations recorded that during the Empress's reign, the nation was at peace and prosperous. Truly a great ruler of her generation.